Welcome to another review of the week for Times Radio Frontline. I'm Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer, now presenter of Frontline during the week. And one of the interviews I'm going to talk about today, which is a brilliant one, is with the former US Ambassador Kurt Volker, who was ambassador to NATO and was, during Donald Trump's first term, his special representative to Ukraine. He gives some fantastic insights as to the thinking behind Donald Trump and what has gone on very recently in different issues, from the Oval Office and that debacle that there was. We didn't dwell on that for too long, but his subsequent thinking and why Trump is making decisions and why he is turning around and continuing with his pressure on Europe and on NATO. He effectively turned around and says Trump feels that if he took his foot off the gas, so to speak, then Europe would sigh a collective sigh of relief and then go back to what it's always doing and not continue its investment in defence, not continue what it's doing. And he says the motivating factor behind what Donald Trump is doing with everything is the fact that he feels that European nations have been freeloading off the United States for defence matters for too long. And he's right. If we look at things then from an economic perspective, because President Trump keeps coming back to that, and I can understand it from his business perspective, and you're putting America into that strongest position. The EU's GDP is about $20.3 trillion. US, $30 plus trillion. Russian economy is $2.2 trillion. Why is he seemingly putting more pressure on the EU than that could be a much bigger trading partner and benefit a lot from, or could hurt America economically, and seem to be sort of placating Russia a lot? Is this down to trying to force Europe to step up and pay for what it's taken the United States for so long?
Right. There's a couple of things. The example that you just gave, Trump would use to say Europe has all this money and they're not pulling their share of the load, and so they should be doing more. And with Putin's the guy who started this war. So you got to work with Putin to get him to stop it. That would be Trump's perspective. Let me broaden out just a little bit to say I don't think that Trump has a clearly defined strategy for how to end the war. He operates on instinct, and he sees Putin's behavior, Europe's behavior, Ukraine's behavior, and he's, I think, reacting with a lot of instinct to how to try to push everybody to a peace agreement. When I take a look at what that amounts to, I see kind of four consistent themes. There is immediate ceasefire, so you stop the killing. There is what Trump would call reciprocity, so Ukraine is paying its own way rather than getting taxpayer money. There is deterrence, meaning you've got to have some way of preventing the war from breaking out again, preventing Putin from attacking again once you have a ceasefire. And you've got to have better burden sharing. You want Europe to do more. And this is where Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are putting together European security assurances, European reassurance force for Ukraine. So these pieces are all out there, and you see him trying to push all of them forward. I think it probably will work. I think that by the end of this year, we probably will have a ceasefire. That's mainly because of the economy in Russia, where Putin will have to do that. And I don't think we're going to have a full-blown agreement because Putin will never agree to anything reasonable.
Now, what I haven't done in this is gone in and deliberately questioned Kurt Volker on each of the views that he's got in, because what I wanted to hear was his view, his understanding. He's worked with Donald Trump, he's worked with NATO members, and it's getting that alternative view rather than trying to get him to come round to my view or our view. It's a good interview, well worth watching. Our second interview this week I want to refer you to is with Operator Starsky. Now, that's his code name. He's an individual who has fought with the Ukrainian military. He now works as a commentator with UATV. And he gives a fantastic insight as to, from a Ukrainian perspective, the thinking behind what is going on with regard to the peace talks, peace negotiations, where he thinks Putin is coming from, what he thinks is motivating the United States, where he understands Ukraine is from Ukraine's position.
Everything is possible, since 2022, even like earlier, since 2014, we've seen all kinds of crazy things happening around Ukraine regarding Russian invasion. Russians are extremely effective at stretching those negotiations. Again, talking about Minsk agreements that lasted since 2014 until 2022, and especially when President Zelensky became a president and organized the most massive ceasefire that was possible in 2019, heavily criticized, by the way, by people like me back in those days. However, now I can see the sense behind it, because back in those days, our artillery was moved back, our armored vehicles were moved back from the front lines, and it gave us opportunity to show the whole world that the Russians, instead of preserving and respecting this ceasefire, instead of that, they were digging trenches closer and closer to us, literally shortening the distance between our positions on a daily basis, because they knew that we would not shoot them. So everything is possible, but Russians are extremely good at playing this. They never say openly that they're not ready for the peace negotiations, but at the same time, they issue different demands, different nuances. This is so typical and so classic if we're talking about Putin, if we're talking about Russians. One thing that our dear viewers must remember at all times is that peace negotiations are not part of Russian strategy. The best way to understand Russian strategy is to look at the Istanbul Protocol, Istanbul demands of Ukraine's capitulation, proposed by Russians back in 2022, where they talk about Ukrainian regions handed to Russia, when they talk about the expansion of the foreign and alien Russian culture on Ukrainian land, when they're talking about no NATO, no European Union, no international troops on Ukrainian territory, and basically Ukrainian army decreased to 50,000 troops, which is so funny. They do it not because they are afraid that like 51,000 troops would attack Russia and do some damage. No, they do it because they want to invade and they want to capture the whole territory. So Russian strategy towards Ukraine is literally disassembling of Ukraine, literally elimination of Ukraine's identity, and turning Ukraine into a new version of like Belarus, like a buffer land.
Combining what Operative Starsky is saying with what Ambassador Kurt Volker is saying gives a good understanding of the geopolitical position that we're in from that Ukrainian, from that United States position. We'll try hard to try and get someone from a Russian position so we can understand that, but it gives that understanding that we need to put together. So I strongly recommend that you watch both of these videos this week. On this, Vladimir Putin has given a very clear statement this week, and we can listen to him here.
In principle, of course, it would be possible, under the auspices of the UN, with the United States, even with European countries, and of course with our partners and friends, to discuss the possibility of introducing temporary administration in Ukraine. For what? In order to hold democratic elections, in order to bring to power a viable government that enjoys the people's trust, and then begin negotiations with it on a peace treaty. Sign legitimate documents that will be recognized throughout the world and will be reliable and stable.
And in that, he's talking about accepting potentially international forces on the ground under United Nations auspices in some form of peace agreement inside Ukraine, with the aim of that setting the conditions for elections, which he suggests are free and fair, I think, as manipulated by him would be the subtitle that's going in on it. And talking United Nations forces, I think he might be trying to suggest that he would want the likes of China to come in and be part of that. This is classic Vladimir Putin. trying delaying tactics, trying everything that he can to suggest that he's being cooperative on the surface, but underneath delaying until he gets the things that he wants. Our next clip that you should watch is just after Donald Trump has given his talk on tariffs across the globe. He talks about peace in Ukraine.
We have to get Russia. They're losing 2,000 on average, 2,500 people a day, young people, soldiers, Russian. Think of that, 2,500 through some days, but on average, probably over about a 1 week period, it's 2,712, they say. They're losing those soldiers. They're dying. They're being decimated. And they're not from our country, but they're from other countries. But they're human beings. They're from Russia. They're from Ukraine in this period, most of them. And we're going to get it stopped. It's a senseless war that would have never happened if I was president, and it shouldn't be allowed to go on. You'd start with all countries, so let's see what happens. There are many countries. I haven't heard a rumor about 15 countries, 10 or 15.
So you're starting with all countries?
Well, essentially, all of the countries that we're talking about, we'll be talking about. Yeah, but take a look at trade with Asia, and I wouldn't say anybody is treated as fairly or nicely, but we are going to treat them. We're going to be much more generous to them in terms of heart. We're going to be much more generous than they were to us. We're going to make a decision on secondary tariffs on Iran based on whether or not they're going to make a deal. If they're going to make a deal, then we're never going to put secondary tariffs on. We're going to hope they have a great, long, and successful life as a country. But we'll see what happens. It's very interesting. I can't imagine them doing anything else but making a deal. I would prefer a deal to the other alternative, which I think everybody in this plane knows what that is.
Just after talking about tariffs, he's talking about peace in Ukraine. And Donald Trump goes on to explain that there are large numbers of people dying, and that's his motivating factor. Of note within this, he turns around and talks about Russian casualties being 2,500 a day, and he says actually over the past month 2,712. He's very specific. The Ukrainian MOD are only talking about 1,200 to 1,500 a day. Whether Donald Trump meant combined Russian and Ukrainian casualties, or whether he just was saying Russian casualties, he is working on different information. That's interesting. In this, he's not just talking about the coalition of the willing and his understanding of what it is. He says 10 countries. I think there's 15 or more that's in there. He then seems to suggest that he's talked to China about this. This ties in with what Putin, I think, wants, and China potentially becoming part of any peacekeeping force. I don't think we're anywhere near a peacekeeping force. I don't think there's going to be a peacekeeping force as part of any ceasefire agreement. I think if European countries and NATO countries go in, or this coalition, the willing, goes in, it'll be to provide a training force to help build the Ukrainian military. That will be a bilateral agreement, not integrated into the peace agreement. But that's my view. Donald Trump's comments are interesting. Thank you for watching this week's recap. If you want to get exclusive access and early access to Times Radio Frontline videos, please sign up at the link below for Times Radio membership. And if you want immediate updates, tune into Times Radio or read it online at thetimes.com. I'm Philip Ingram. Thank you.